I was being followed. It had been a few weeks, and I knew I was being watched by someone. A man I could never get a good look at. But now, as the hairs on my neck shot up, I know he's here, behind me. He first appeared when I got out of an abusive relationship, always in black. He had a sickening grin on his head that rested unnaturally on a deformed neck, and he followed me, stalked me, everywhere I went. At the time, I had just survived attempting to take my own life and had moved back in with family. And yet, I remember feeling so alone. They talked around me, pretending things were okay, and for a moment, I thought maybe whoever was following me could make me feel less lonely. Eventually, my sister introduced me to watercolor. She was an artist and showed me how to blend and paint whatever came to mind. And although I was still numb, I found it enjoyable. It was the creative outlet I needed to express all the pain and suffering I felt. I would spend hours at the dining room table, surrounded by my painting materials, my music, and my cat. And for all but a second, I had forgotten about him, the man who had been following me. But the art was only a momentary distraction. As soon as I was done, I'd fall back into the same old episodes of loneliness and self-pity. I remember feeling cold despite the warmth of the summer night. I remember sitting in my room for hours in the dark, just scribbling in a notebook. And you know how sometimes you can just tell when someone is looking your way? That night, I remember feeling like I was being watched. Heart pounding louder than my footsteps, I quickly closed my door and pulled the curtains shut. But that feeling, it stayed. I rushed to the living room, hoping to escape the feeling, or, God forbid, whoever was causing it. I remember passing the dinner table, picking up my paintbrush, and thinking I needed some sort of distraction. I scanned the room and eventually landed on the TV and realized two things. One, video games could be a good distraction. And two, maybe if I turn on the TV at this time of night, whoever was outside would think there were adults here. So I grabbed the remote, plugged in my controller, and turned on the TV. And on the screen, that's when I saw his face.
There was a crooked man, and he walked with a crooked smile. He found a crooked penny under a crooked fence. He bought a crooked pet, which caught a crooked rat, and they all lived unhappily in a little crooked flat.
There is no right way, no consistent way to portray him. The crooked man from the nursery rhyme is different from how he appears in the Conjuring movie. Both are different to the crooked man from the video game of the same name, which is how I see him. In all versions, he is crooked and vile, but to me, he is a visual representation of my deepest fears, crippling anxiety, drowning depression, and darkest thoughts. This is apparently common for people suffering like myself, to create a mental image of their illnesses. At least, that's what I thought until one day, in my room, my mom found a sketch of the crooked man. That's not mine. Another thing that people like myself might do is repress memories, bury otherwise unhealthy memories in the depths of the mind. And while rare, this is exactly what I did. Scattered through my water paintings was grim drawings of the crooked man, with his name carved in and around his image. These were creations I had no memory of creating. This was a self-portrait sketched by everything ugly going on in my mind. I thought it was harmless, but that was before my mom found my notebooks, my graphic sketches, and the very same feeling that someone was watching her. Mom shook harder than I had ever seen her as she told me this. That day, as she cleaned out my stuff and stumbled upon one of my old notebooks, she encountered the crooked man, a dark painting made by someone she didn't think could have been her daughter. Mom said the book felt heavy with darkness. And that night, it was his presence that loomed over her bed, keeping Mom awake, shivering all night despite the fireplace in her room. Our encounters with the crooked man may have been separate, but both summoned the same feelings of despair. I thought the crooked man was something that belonged to me, a product of my sick mind, but I was wrong. It was like he was infectious. He kept Mom up all night, restless and aching, until finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Exhausted as she was, she got out of bed, grabbed the notebook, and threw it into the fireplace, watching it burn. I remember she told me it was the strangest sensation, as if she was destroying something evil. Like the relief that comes from waking up after a bad dream. Like she took a dive into something poisonous and had finally floated back to the surface. It wasn't a feeling of refreshment, but a feeling that things had returned to normal. A feeling she said had been taken for granted. So Mom was free, but I was not. The crooked man remained with me every second of every day. At the best of times, he is in the distance, like an afterthought, like a stain on the wallpaper, barely affecting me or how I feel. Sometimes, he appears suddenly, as if to jump scare me, and at the worst of times, he is standing right in front of my eyes, blocking my view, ready to hurt me. He was like a black hole, stealing the air, the light, and the color from my life, creating a world that was effectively gray. And where's the beauty and water painting in a world like that? So I turned to drinking. It was how I decided to cope, how I managed to feel numb, how I tried to keep him at a distance I was comfortable with. I didn't have an appetite anymore. He'd stolen that too. So drinks replaced breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And blackouts replaced sleep. Bottles and cans replaced friends and family. In my head, I justified it as keeping them safe from the crooked man. And I wish I could say it worked, but it didn't. Because as I fell further and further into my addiction, he just grew closer and closer until he was a part of me, a parasite. I was admitted into rehab shortly after, I think, and for the first time, I felt his grip on me loosen. With every session, he let go of me a little bit more. The interesting thing is, as I began to feel better, staying sober for longer and learning new coping techniques, he'd pat me on the back and retreat into the distance, as if he was proud of me for severing our relationship. He was cast off like some of my memories, but I still felt his gaze. I try not to think about him, but it's hard when I don't remember what it feels like to not have him around. I was in rehab a long time, where I learned ways to cope that didn't involve a bottle, like knitting, gardening, writing, and art. These are positive outlets, and they have been ways for me to connect with my family, make new friends, and try to fill in for 2 years of my life that I can barely remember because of him. None of this is easy, but the day I can finally say I am free of the crooked man will be worth all the hard work.